Hi everyone, in this video, we will dive into the lookup functions in Microsoft Excel. We'll start by understanding what the lookup functions are, where lookup functions are used, and why they matter. Then, we will walk through some simple examples using VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and Xlookup functions. We'll also cover more advanced cases like how to look up where there are multiple lookup values, and also how to handle errors in an efficient way. So what are lookup functions? At a very basic level, these functions help you find a value from one table, which we call the source table or also the lookup table, and bring that value into another table, which is also called the target table. Let's jump into a few examples to see how it works. If you'd like to follow along, you can download the same Excel file that I'm using. Just click the link in the description. It will take you to the Skillnator website where you can hit the download now button to get the exercise file. There are two exercise files on the website. One is the raw exercise file, the other one is with the solutions. Let's go ahead and open the raw exercise file. Let's first navigate to the basic VLOOKUP sheet. Here we've got two tables, the lookup table and the target table. The lookup table has two columns, the salesperson name and the respective sales amount. The target table has the same two columns, but here we have names of only three salespeople, Jacob, Michael, and Andy. Our objective here is to pick up the relevant values of these employees from the lookup table and bring it into the second column of the target table. We can achieve this result via the VLOOKUP formula. Let's go ahead and type in the VLOOKUP function. The VLOOKUP function has four arguments. The first one is the lookup value. This is the value based on which we want the function to perform the lookup. So in this example, I'm going to select cell B4, which contains the name of the salesperson. Second argument is the table array. In our example, this refers to the lookup table, or in other words, it refers to the table from which we want the function to retrieve the value. So here, I'm going to select the table from where I want the function to retrieve the value, which is the lookup table. The third argument is column index number. Here, we need to input the column number from which we want the function to retrieve the result. I want the function to bring in the sales value. The sales value is in the second column of the table array that we have provided to the function. So I'm going to put in 2. And the last argument, which is optional, is the range lookup or the type of match. This basically means whether we want the formula to find the exact match of the lookup value or we can allow some level of estimation. For now, we want the exact match, so I'm going to select false. Now I'm going to close the bracket and it will retrieve the right value for us. Now I want to drag the formula for rest of the employees, but before that, I'm going to freeze the table array that we have provided to the function. And after that, I can copy and paste the formula to the rest of the cells. Before moving on, I want to highlight a very important watch out. It's a mistake that many people often make, and it's related to the selection of the table array. The table array we provide to the function should not always be the full lookup table like we did in this example. Instead, you have to select the table range very carefully such that the first column of your table array should be the column that contains the lookup value. Let me explain this further with the help of an example. I'm going to remove the formulas that we had put in. And now let's assume our lookup table had three columns. The first column was salesperson code. Now let's apply the formula again. I'm going to select the lookup value. And for table array, I'm going to again select the entire lookup table. And you'll see that the formula will not work. This is because the VLOOKUP function tries to find the lookup value in the first column of the table array provided. In the first column of this table array, there is a salesperson code and not the salesperson name. So the formula throws out an error. If we correct it, that is, I'll select the same two arrays that we selected before, and I'm going to give the column number 2, it will give us the right results. Next, we are going to look into the HLOOKUP function. Let's navigate to the HLOOKUP sheet. HLOOKUP basically is the mirror image of the VLOOKUP function. So if you have a clear understanding of VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP should be a walk in the park. In simple terms, HLOOKUP is used when your lookup table is arranged in a horizontal format. Like you can see in this example, we have the same exact data as we had on the previous page. It's just transposed and arranged in a horizontal manner. So if we want to retrieve a value from this lookup table, we can use the HLOOKUP function. So let's put in the HLOOKUP. The syntax of the HLOOKUP function is also very similar to the VLOOKUP. First, we have got the lookup value, for which I'm going to provide the salesperson name. Next, we have the table array, for which I will select the horizontal table from which I want the function to retrieve the value. Next, we have the row index number, and this is one of those aspects which is different in HLOOKUP function versus the VLOOKUP. In VLOOKUP, we had the column index number in the third argument. Here we have the row number. So in this case, the resultant value, that is the sales amount, is in the second row of the table array. So I'm going to put in 2, and I want the formula to retrieve an exact match of the lookup value. So I'm going to put in false, and there we go. Again, I can freeze the ranges by pressing the F4 key on my keyboard and drag the formula down. Next, we're going to look into the Xlookup function. Xlookup does the same job as VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP, but it's incredibly simple and flexible. Let's navigate to the Xlookup sheet. Here we have the same dataset as our first exercise on VLOOKUP. Let's try to solve it using the Xlookup function. So let's type in Xlookup. Xlookup function has a total of 6 arguments, but only 3 of them are mandatory. That is lookup value, lookup array, and resultant array. For lookup value, we will again provide the salesperson name. For lookup array, we will give reference to the column that contains the lookup values. So in this case, it will be the first column. And for the return array, we will give reference of the column that contains the resultant values, or the values we want the formula to bring in for us. And in this case, it's the sales amount column. Let's close the formula, and there we go. One important watch out here is that the size of the lookup array and the return array should be exactly the same. Otherwise, the formula can throw an error. For example, here, I'm going to change the size of the lookup array. I'll make it smaller, hit enter, and you can see it's giving an error. So let's do a quick comparison of the Xlookup function with the traditional lookup formulas. First of all, as we saw, Xlookup has a much simpler syntax than the traditional lookup functions. Secondly, Xlookup can retrieve values from both the direction. The traditional lookup functions are restricted and can only look up value from one direction. Let's learn it via an example. I'm going to copy and paste the same exact data down. And this time around, I have flipped the lookup table such that the first column is the sales amount and the second column has the salesperson name. Now, if I want to retrieve the sales amount from this table, I cannot do it using the VLOOKUP function. Let's try it out. So I'm going to put in the lookup value, select the table, and it doesn't work. This is because the VLOOKUP function picks up the resultant value only if the resultant value is on the right-hand side of the lookup value column. In this case, the sales amount, which is the resultant value, is on the left-hand side of the lookup column, so the VLOOKUP will not work here. However, Xlookup can do the job for us. I'm going to use Xlookup again, put in the lookup value, select the lookup array, which in this case is the second column. I know the headings are flipped around, so don't worry about that. And then the return array will be the sales amount. There we go. Coming back to our comparison, a third advantage of Xlookup is that it has inbuilt error handling function. Whereas for traditional lookup formula, we have to do some workaround to handle the errors. We'll look into it in more detail towards the end of this video. Now the question is, if Xlookup has so many benefits, why do we really need to learn about VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP? Well, the answer is that if you're building a new Excel sheet or a model from scratch, you can always use the Xlookup function. It's far easier and flexible. However, it's important to have some awareness of VLOOKUP function or the legacy formulas. Let's say if you come across an old Excel file which was built 8 to 9 years back, chances are high that it will still have the VLOOKUP formulas. Therefore, it's always good to have the understanding of the legacy functions, but if you're building something new, feel free to use Xlookup always. Next, we're going to work through a more advanced but a very common lookup problem, and that is when we have to look up based on 2 matching keys. So far we have seen that we looked up the values from the lookup table based on the salesperson name alone. But what if we want to retrieve the result based on the salesperson name as well as the month name. Let's go to the next sheet, which is called Advanced Lookup. And in here, we have a similar problem which I was talking about. I have a lookup table which has 3 columns: salesperson name, month name, and the sales amount. In the target table, in the first row, I want to bring in the sales amount for Emily, but only for the month of February. Let's see what happens if we use the Xlookup function like we did before. So I'm going to type in Xlookup, put the salesperson name for the lookup value. For the lookup array, we're going to provide the column that contains the salesperson name, and for the resultant array, we will select the sales amount. And as we can see, it brings the January number. This is because the function is not aware that we are looking for the February number. Therefore, it brings the first number that it can find related to Emily in the lookup table. To tell the function that we want to retrieve the data only for the month of February, we will need to apply a technique. And this technique involves setting up a helper column that contains a combo of the 2 matching keys. So I'm going to set up a new column called combo. And in this column, I want to combine both the salesperson name and the month. This can be achieved via the concatenate function. I'll first give the salesperson name, and as a second argument, I'll give the month name, and then I'll drag the formula down. Likewise, I'm going to set up a combo column in the lookup table. Another option to combine the 2 values is use the ampersand sign. So I'm going to select the salesperson, then put the ampersand sign and select the month. Next, we can apply the Xlookup function on this combo column. So I'm going to put in Xlookup. For the lookup value, I'll select the combo column that we have set up in the target table. For the lookup array, I'll select the combo column from the lookup table, and we're going to select the sales amount as the resultant array. And now we have the values for the month of February. We can freeze the ranges and drag the formula down. Last but not the least, we're going to look into the error handling functions. When using lookup functions, there's always a chance of formulas running into errors. For example, if they don't find the lookup value in the lookup tables. To make your Excel files look clean and professional, it's always recommended to use error handling techniques. Let's go to the next sheet called error handling. I have a similar data set over here. Let's apply a VLOOKUP formula to bring the sales amount from the lookup table. For the lookup value, I'm going to give the salesperson name. For the array, I'm going to give the table array. Give the second column an exact match. As we can see, the function is able to retrieve the sales value for Michael, but for others, it's throwing an error. This is because the other employees are not there in the lookup table. Now, of course, it makes your Excel look buggy and messy. To clean this up, we can use a function called ifError. I'm just going to copy this formula as we will need it later. Now I'm going to delete it and put in ifError. The ifError function takes in 2 arguments. The first argument is the formula that we want the function to evaluate. So I'm going to put in the VLOOKUP formula, which I had copied just now. If the formula returns a valid result, the function, the ifError function, will bring in that result. The second argument is value ifError. So if the formula that we provided in the first argument results in an error, the ifError function will return the value which we provide in the second argument. So here I will say not found. Now I can drag the formula down and it works. We can also put something else in the value ifError argument. That is the second argument. We can put 0, or if we want, we can put in blank. Now, a short while back, I just mentioned that error handling is much easier with Xlookup. So let's see how it's done. I will first apply the Xlookup function to this problem. The lookup value will be the salesperson name. Lookup array will be the first column, and sales amount will be the return array. So we see the same error again that we saw in case of the VLOOKUP. Now, instead of wrapping the Xlookup function inside of the ifError function, like we had to do in case of VLOOKUP, here I can simply use the built-in argument of the Xlookup function. Let's deep dive into the Xlookup function, and I'm going to put in a comma here. And as you can see, the fourth argument of the Xlookup function is called ifNotFound. This refers to what do we want the function to do if it doesn't find the lookup value in the lookup table. So here I would just put in not found and close the formula. And there we go. So basically, when it comes to error handling, Xlookup makes the life so much easier. Let's do a quick wrap up of what we've covered. Lookup functions help you pull values from a table based on matching keys. VLOOKUP and Xlookup are older formulas, but is still very common in legacy files. Xlookup is the modern, more flexible option and much easier to use. For lookups with multiple matching keys, use the combo technique. And to keep your Excel sheets clean, always add error handling functions. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe.